Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Luca Tateo from the University of Oslo in Oslo, Norway. Dr. Tateo is Associate Professor in the Department of Special Needs Education at the University of Oslo. His current research interest covers the general areas of cultural psychology of education, art and affect, the study of imagination as higher psychological process, the affective logic, and the aesthetic dimension of psychic life, and the cultural meditation of grief. Today, we are talking about his recent publication in Cultural and Psychology, Face Masks as Layers of Meanings in Times of COVID-19. Dr. Tateo, thank you for being here. So first, I just wanted to start by asking a simple question about your paper. And you talk a lot about how mask wearing is both very ordinary, but also it's an extraordinary experience. Can you just talk more about that experience and how we can escalate or de-escalate these types of experiences?
Yes, of course. I'm very happy to have this conversation with you. And well, I probably have to start from the idea of this research, of this study. Well, what everybody realized very soon during this pandemic is that we had to deal with this strange object, which is the face mask. Probably we saw this object in a number of medical movies around, and it was actually an object that we somehow contextualize in the medical environment. But suddenly someone told us that we had to wear these masks every time we meet other people. In some places, like in Italy, for instance, they became mandatory even walking in the street. So I became curious about how an object can suddenly become the center of a lot of attention, but also a lot of meaning making. How an object that we can be peripheral in our everyday life, probably we just saw it going to the hospital, it became suddenly central. So how we can make sense of it, and eventually how people can decide or not to use it. Well, so this idea, this curiosity actually match very well with some theoretical work that I did together with my colleague Pina Marsico. Like some times ago, we had a book called Ordinary Things and Their Extraordinary Meanings. Well, in this book, we invited a number of colleagues to reflect upon the dynamics between ordinary and extraordinary meanings of the everyday objects. So the book was about, I don't know, mirrors, money, clocks. So the idea was that somehow it's an old idea that comes from William James' idea of what makes an ordinary object into my special object. So how we attribute meaning to our life world, to what populates our life world. Well, the idea was that somehow, as we make meaning in the dynamics, in the dialectics between certainty and uncertainty in life, so should we do with the object of our life. So just imagine a life in which everything is ordinary, is completely ordinary. It would be a very gray existence. On the other hand, imagine something a life in which everything is constantly extraordinary, uncertain. It will be unbearable. Okay? So we started by thinking that maybe we should have some kind of process or way of dealing with the ordinary, extraordinary dialectics. And hence, personally, my interpretation of cultural psychology is focused on semiotic dynamics. So how we use sign to make meaning, to produce and interpret meaning. Well, then I started to look at how we can use signs to turn things into ordinary or extraordinary things. And we have a number of I would say universal mechanisms, semiotic mechanisms to do this. One very simple, basic mechanism is decoration. We decorate everything, every object. And this decoration is a way to turn, for instance, an ordinary object into a special or extraordinary object, into a magical object, into a brand object, which is somehow very, very similar to a magical object today. Mm-hmm. So decoration is one way through which we escalate the meaning of an object from ordinary to extraordinary. But there are other ways, like for instance, we can limit the access of an object to an object in order to change his meaning. If you ever book a seat on a flight, for instance, well, when you enter the flight, you have the business class and the economy class. But basically, it's exactly the same seat, but the fact of limiting the access through, for instance, high fares is completely changing the meaning of the seat, which is just one row before yours. Okay, so all these mechanisms, which are basically production of signs about objects, change the meaning of the object. And this is a basic mechanism. We find it in marketing, for instance, but also in religion. Well, I started to observe that very soon, when we introduce the face masks in our everyday life, very soon something happened. Very soon, the shape of the shape of the masks started to multiply. So you started to see a lot of different kind of masks, and this ring a bell. So I started to say, oh, okay, maybe here we are observing exactly this process of dialectics between ordinary and extraordinary in an object. But masks are also a very special object, because it's an object which is on the border between the body, ourself, and the world. It's a surface. It's a surface. So it was a very, was likely a candidate, an ideal candidate to observe the production of signs over a surface. So that's the origin of the idea.
That's really cool. I thought that was fascinating. I just want to know, like, how this started with the design, like where, like how you took it, what questions you asked, like your participants, and how did asking such questions address the questions you had about face masks? Just for listeners at home, what would you say your design was for the study?
Mm-hmm. Well, once I decided to study how people make meaning of this object, okay, how they have to construct the meaning of this unfamiliar object. The second point, the second question was, okay, how can I study a process rather than an outcome? So I didn't want to know whether the opinion of people about the masks. Okay? I was not interested in the outcome or in the positioning of people. I wanted to observe how people make sense, so the process of meaning making. And of course, to observe a process, you need to use an approach that puts you in the making, okay? And I remember one of my favorite, actually, psychologists, who is Stanley Milgram. I think that Stanley Milgram, which is kind of forgotten name in methodology, with this idea of social experiments, he had a great intuition, okay, which is the fact that in order to study psychological processes, we have to ask people to do things, and then observing people while doing things. But most importantly, we have to observe people doing things in real life. Then I set up this kind of social experiment. So I simply created a kind of fake survey, online survey, using, and I took images of different face masks. From very simple surgical face masks, the one that we see today during the pandemic, to very strange kind of masks, like the gas mask, the war gas mask, things like that. And I asked people to rate how safe they would feel with this mask. This, of course, was completely uninteresting task, okay? Because what I was really interested in was in the justification of people. So how people justify their choice. And that were the real data. So I asked people, oh, will you feel safe with this kind of mask? They answer, yes, more or less safe. But then I asked people, okay, why? And that why is the real data. So how people make sense of their choice. So that was the first part of the survey. The second part of the tool I used was to have a face mask with different decorations. So, and I asked people to choose between these different layouts of mask, asking which one would you wear in public. So the research question was double. The first one was how people make meaning of the object in terms of safety and unsafety. And the second one was how people make meaning of the object as a mediational in the interface between me and the others. So once I got the answer, I simply analyzed them qualitatively, and well, I had some interesting results, which is basically the fact that the outcome or the decision of wearing or not a mask is a kind of contingent. Yeah, people can behave differently. Behavior is ephemeral, just has opinions. What is relevant, I think, for psychology is to understand how people make meaning and elaborate the process of decision making. So my conclusion was that people choose to wear the mask according to the meaning they make of the mask, and the look of the mask, or even the signs on the surface of the mask, are a very important element in the meaning making of the mask. Like, for instance, the feeling of safety. I feel safe wearing a mask. But the kind of sign that you have on the mask makes a lot of difference in which kind of meaning I attribute to the mask.
That makes sense. You've answered like a lot of questions that are already laid out here that we had interest in finding out. I think it's like really interesting about the identity of the person of wearing the mask, like how that relates to their decision making. So like how can we understand the decoration of the mask as a way to engage with safety while also maintaining one's own identity, not being lost in like all the sea of the masks?
Mm-hmm. Well, I start from one theoretical model, which is the idea that human beings are, of course, constantly producing meaning in a very interesting process, double process of auto-dialogue and hetero-dialogue. So it means we constantly produce and interpret meaning from ourselves, for ourselves, and for the others. But at the same time, we constantly receive those meanings from the other. So we are in constant dialogue with ourselves and with the others, but we are also constantly in dialogue with ourselves through the others. Okay? So if you consider this basic model, where is the face mask? The face mask is exactly an object located at the interface of this auto and hetero dialogue. And it's not a case that face mask is an object that you wear on the lower part of your face. So it's definitely one of the key parts of our body interface. So that's basically what I try to understand. So what happens when I add one layer in this auto and hetero dialogue? Well, and of course, this affects my identity, my own identity. So how I am in dialogue with myself through the face mask. And of course, this affects my identity also with respect to the hetero dialogue. But the mask in itself is not a neutral object. And we come here back to the idea of ordinary, extraordinary. Because the face mask can have also a lot of different design features. I think that, yeah, we can, today is the inauguration day, so I can talk about politics a little bit. In the USA, for instance, wearing mask very, very quickly became a political statement. And the appearance of the face mask became a political statement. So the first political statement is wearing or not wearing a mask. The second layer of meaning is what I have on my mask. Will I have my national flag, for instance? That's a political statement. So, but what is interesting is that the political statement on my mask is a message that has two different directions. It's clearly a message to the other. So wearing my face mask with the national flag probably will say, you see, I'm a real patriot. But is also a message to myself. So I saying to myself, I am a real patriot. But at the same time, oh, I'm wearing a face mask with my national flag on it. So as my national flag it's also a meaning, of course, of protection. So probably I will feel more protected than wearing just a blank mask, for instance. So you see how the meaning of the object has two directions, towards the other and toward myself. But at the same time, as I know that my national flag on the mask is having an effect on the other, the effect on the other is also affecting myself in return.
I thought that was interesting to note, like having those political messages on a mask can change how people view also like what they view a mask to be. Would you say that having those political messages on masks cause more problems, or it's less harm than what maybe people are trying to show with having their political views on the mask?
Hmm, hmm. That's an interesting question in the sense that, well, we can assume that um, every kind of sign changes the meaning. And as the process of interpretation of meaning is, of course, a relational process, I can interpret a design of face mask in many different ways. And I will say that my point is that it's not interesting to know how many people will interpret a message in a certain way. Because what we can find is a very trivial result. The fact that, of course, some people will interpret in a certain way, some other people will interpret in another way. But this is trivial. Of course, we already know this. What is interesting to me is how people use the sign to make meaning of this object, and how this meaning-making process is, for instance, affecting the likelihood of people using that safety device, because we have to remember that we are talking about a life-saving device, basically. So not wearing the mask is a risky behavior. And usually what you do is, when it comes to predicting risky or safe behavior, you look at some variables that can predict the final outcome. I think that this is not the most productive way. The most productive way is to observe of the way people make meaning. And this will, of course, allow you to make an intervention eventually to change the meaning process. That's, for instance, the difference. A lot of, I think that a lot of public or social communication campaigns fail exactly because they focus on trying to change people's behavior. But behavior is ephemeral. The point is how we can support people change of meaning. Behavior will follow meaning and not the other way around.
That makes sense. So after like all of your research that you've done, where do you see this going forward? Like, what are your next steps?
Well, first of all, I think that the focus on the ordinary, extraordinary dynamics is a very promising field. Especially when it focuses on the interface of the body. We tend to forget that the body is Well, is the place in which the inner and outer dimension meet. And they do not only meet as in, as on the mirror or two sides of the mirror, but they also meet as reciprocal action. So we act upon the world, and that's why how we relate to the world, but also the world acts upon us. So every element that symbolically lies at the interface between the inner and outer has a special relevance for psychology.
So where do you see the next step for cultural psychology in general?
Oof, there are so many promising directions. I think that one of the most important thing that we need to do is to work on innovative methodologies. That's the most important thing that we have to do. So we have to develop methodologically. Yeah, and I think we have to innovate methodologically, and that's what I'm trying to do in this very small and simple study on the face masks.
Well, it's very interesting, and I'm thankful that you were able to meet with us to talk. So thank you so much. And if our listeners are interested to learn more, they can be sure to read your latest work, Face Masks as Layers in the Meaning of Times of COVID-19, currently published online first in the Culture and Psychology. So Dr. Tateo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.